Thanks, Pat, and welcome back. Israel's Security Cabinet is exploring next move possibilities after the most significant conflict with Syria and Iran in years. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, the incident represented a dramatic escalation and sparked talks of war in the Middle East.
The incident began when Iran sent an unmanned aerial vehicle, or UAV, into Israeli airspace that an Israeli spokesman called a severe violation of Israeli sovereignty. Israel destroyed the drone and then countered with an airstrike on the command center that launched the UAV. During Israel's attack, Syria launched at least 20 anti-aircraft missiles and downed an F-16. It marked the first time in more than 30 years an Israeli plane was shot down by enemy fire. The pilot suffered serious wounds and was airlifted to a hospital. Israel then launched a second large-scale attack. It struck 12 targets inside Syria, including 4 Iranian installations. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu emphasized his warnings about Iran.
Iran seeks to use Syrian territory to attack Israel for its professed goal of destroying Israel. Our warnings were 100% correct. Israel holds Iran and its Syrian host responsible for today's aggression. We will continue to do whatever is necessary to protect our sovereignty and our security.
After the incident, the U.S. State Department said Iran's ambition to project its power and dominance places all of the people in the region at risk. And the U.S. Defense Department said Israel is our closest security partner in the region, and we fully support Israel's inherent right to defend itself.
In Tehran, Iran downplayed its involvement, while hundreds of thousands of Iranians celebrated the 39th anniversary of the Iranian Revolution. They shouted "Death to Israel" and "Death to America" and displayed a number of ballistic missiles. One Israeli expert said Iran is determined to build Syria into an Iranian military base, while Israel is determined to stop it. Former IDF intelligence officer Marco Moreno told CBN News Iran is advancing its goal to dominate the region and threaten Israel.
Lebanon is they own Lebanon. Iraq, it's on its way. Syria, not yet, but it will happen. It's a strategic decision that the Iranians took to open a front with us in the Golan Heights. I think 2018 will be very important for us to deal with this problem.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News,
Israel
Jerusalem.
says its latest airstrikes in Syria are a message, a warning directed at Iran. The air raids pounded at least a dozen positions, including a command bunker. This escalation began yesterday after an Israeli warplane was shot down. The CBC's Derek Stoffel has the latest.
Tensions have been rising for weeks now along Israel's northern borders, and yesterday we saw the most serious encounter between Israel, Syria, and Iran since Syria's long war began 7 years ago. Israel launched 2 significant bombing raids yesterday targeting Syrian and Iranian military positions on the ground in Syria, and that is significant for a number of reasons. It marks the first time that Israel has directly confronted Iranian military assets during Syria's war, and it's the first time in decades that Israel has lost a warplane. An F-16 fighter jet was brought down by anti-aircraft fire yesterday morning. The 2 pilots escaped and are being treated in hospital. Now, this all began yesterday before dawn when an Iranian drone flew into Israeli airspace. Here in Jerusalem, Israel's Prime Minister had this warning.
Israel holds Iran and its Syrian host responsible for today's aggression. We will continue to do whatever is necessary to protect our sovereignty and our security.
Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke by telephone yesterday with the Russian president. The Kremlin says Vladimir Putin told Netanyahu that steps must be taken to make sure that there isn't a dangerous escalation in the region. Derek Stoffel, CBC News, Jerusalem.
Well, to help unpack this story, we've turned to Kamran Bukhari in Washington. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Global Policy. So, Kamran, let's begin with what we're hearing from the Israeli leadership, where you're hearing them blame Iran directly and also saying they'll do what they have to protect their sovereignty. Try to make some sense as to how Israel is responding and where they need to move next.
So, Natasha, I think that what happened on a Friday night, the night between Friday and Saturday, with regards to the drone, and then the strikes launched by the Israelis, and then, of course, the shooting down of the F-16, that's just the latest. That's a significant escalation from what has been a pattern for quite some time, which is that Israeli aircraft from time to time conduct airstrikes on shipments of weapons moving from one side to the other inside Syria, and keeping an eye on Iranian movements and Hezbollah movements. I mean, this is the unintended consequence of degrading ISIS, which is that Iran has an upper hand in Syria.
What do you make of Iran's role in all of this? Is the Israeli Prime Minister right?
I think he is right in the sense that, of course, Iran and Israel are enemies, and Iran being on the northern doorstep of Israel is not good for Israeli national security. I mean, when you're dealing with strategic affairs, you don't rely on the good or bad intentions. You look at capabilities, and so they're looking at Iranian capabilities, and they know that Iran has ambitions to expand its footprint in the region, especially in Syria, using Syria as a launchpad to project power beyond, and so that's a big concern for Israel.
Kamran, looking at it from this vantage point, this is bad news for Israel. It's theoretically very bad news for Iran, and certainly bad news for Syria. So who stands to gain from this?
That's where I'll say that none of these actors have an interest in escalation and confrontation on a large scale. But at the same time, their imperatives, their strategic interests can collide, and therefore the likelihood of these kind of cross-border clashes and Israeli responses is only going to increase with time. I mean, intent aside, at the end of the day, their interests diverge sharply, and therefore we can't rule out the possibility of continued confrontation and perhaps, unfortunately, even escalation.
Can you drill down a bit on that for me? You anticipate that we will see an escalation in this fighting?
I mean, look, if one side is sending in a drone, the other side is taking that as a hostile act and then engaging in action, in counterstrikes, and therefore then that puts the ball back in the Iranian-Syrian court, and therefore, it's a tit for tat. And so the question is perceptions and misperceptions. Will they contain the situation to the current levels, or is there a risk, a danger of escalation? I'm not taking any chances, and I don't want to rule out the possibility of escalation, even though none of the actors involved want to go down that road.
So what would need to happen within the next day or so for all of this to settle down?
I think that, the ball is in the Syrian-Iranian court. They may be emboldened by the fact that they've brought down an Israeli F-16, which hasn't happened, in quite a while. So they may be encouraged to escalate or to counterstrike. And that's the problem. One side takes a step, the other side has to countermand that, and then you have a tit for tat. And I think I'm going to watch for what the Iranians will do. And of course, the Israelis have continued to remain vigilant and conducting preemptive strikes. So how do the Syrians and the Iranians react at the next Israeli preemptive strike?
A relentless pounding that's lasted for 4 days straight. Since Monday, Syrian government troops have waged an intense air campaign on eastern Ghouta, the only significant opposition pocket left near the capital Damascus. More than 200 civilians have reportedly been killed, with 58 alone killed in bombardments on Thursday night. The UN and the US have called for an immediate cessation of hostilities to deliver aid and evacuate the critically ill. But in a closed-door session held Thursday, the UN Security Council couldn't agree on any action. Speaking before the session, the Syrian government's main ally, Russia, said a ceasefire was not possible.
You understand that's not realistic. We would like to see a ceasefire and the end of war in Syria, but with the terrorists, I'm not sure they are in agreement with what the US is proposing.
Doctors on the ground say it's the worst 4 days the area's experienced since the war started, and that the humanitarian situation is desperate. An estimated 400,000 people are trapped in eastern Ghouta and face severe shortages of food, fuel and medical supplies. Some 700 critically ill and injured patients are in need of evacuation for treatment. The enclave has been under siege since 2013, but the government has only stepped up its campaign to retake it this week.
Olympic officials have confirmed that a cyber attack took place during the opening ceremony for the Pyeongchang Games. According to Reuters, organizers say the attack was mainly on TV and internet access, and in some cases, it lasted for 12 hours. No information about the attackers has been revealed, at least not yet. For more on this, let's bring in Mark Nunakoven. He's the Vice President of Cloud Research at Trend Micro. Mark, what were these attackers after? Do you have any sense?
So this is the interesting thing about this attack, is it seemed that it was aimed at disruption. So normally we see cyber criminals attacking to either steal data or for profit, but all indicators for this attack is that they were looking to disrupt the games in order to make a splash.
Okay, but an attack was surely to have been expected. What does it tell us that on the very first night of the games, at the opening ceremonies, one was able to get through the whatever security was in place and pulled one off?
So I think it's really important to recognize that the Olympics are probably the target when it comes to hackers. We've seen this with every successive games. They've been more and more of a target, and the team behind operations at the Olympics does a phenomenal job at keeping all of this from the public eye. So it just happens in the background and the games continue on undisrupted, right? Whereas this year, this is the first time we've seen them actually acknowledge that an attack had an impact on the games themselves on site as well as for viewers around the world. So it's the first time we've seen one slip through the defenses, even though those defenses are world class.
Look into your crystal ball for me. What do you think? Will we see more of these kinds of attacks, and do you expect them to have more of an impact than the one we saw at the opening ceremonies?
Looking in that crystal ball, I'm going to tell you they are going to see more attacks. It's just inevitable. We've seen that rise. It's too tempting a target for hackers to make a name for themselves, but I'm really confident that this organization, the Olympic Games Committee and the operations teams on site will continue to fend those off, and this is just a small blip in what otherwise is going to be a fantastic games.
You know, though, you and I, when we talk about these kinds of attacks, often talk about what the value that the hackers are going after. Sometimes it's data, sometimes it's money, it's all different kinds of things. Is the value in carrying out an attack on something like the Olympics, what you touched on earlier, just the name recognition that you were able to pull off something like that?
It is, absolutely. It's cred in the underground, right? For you to be able to say as a hacker, I took down the Olympic Games, I had an impact, it was me. That means you can charge premium rates for your services, you'll get more underground customers, and you're going to make more money overall, as well as just bragging rights within the criminal community.
You know, leading up to Sochi, and I was there, so I went through a bunch of the different sort of security protocols as we were heading over, and one of the main ones was around cybersecurity. Don't use, open Wi-Fi connections, all these different things that people could do to protect themselves. Most people, or more people than ever, are watching these games online, on their devices, on their computers, on their whatever it may be. Are there things that we should be doing as consumers of the event to try to protect ourselves?
So it's a really good question, and a lot of the security is around people who are on site. Because they're on foreign soil, they're connecting to unknown networks. There's a lot of that training that you yourself went through and the entire CBC team in order to keep themselves safe so that they don't have their credentials leaked out and make things easy for hackers. For viewers at home, the good news is that there's very little risk to viewers at home. You can enjoy the best coverage ever by simply selecting the feeds you want, and there's essentially no risk to you at home. What you do need to look out for is criminals will up their game around phishing campaigns, sending out links via email saying, did you see that gold medal performance by the Canadian figure skating team last night? Click here to go and see that video. That's normally an opening that we see spike around the Olympic time. The safest route is go through your approved apps, So pull up the CBC Olympic app, click on the figure skating link through that way. Don't click on these links that are sent to you via email.
It's remarkable that, for all the technology, it's the human problem. We still click on those emails, don't we?
It is. It's understandable. It's tempting. You want to see the latest and greatest. The good news is it's easier than ever to find it through legitimate, approved sources.
Indeed it is. Mark, thanks for this. Mark Nunakoven, Vice President of Cloud Research at Trend Micro.
Ridiculous. Studies, though, have shown that humans can tell gay from straight from appearance alone. But despite what you see in that clip from The Office, there has never been a real gaydar device. Until now, researchers from Stanford University have developed an algorithm which they claim can tell gay from straight from photos alone. It's all based on facial recognition technology. That technology scans your face, looking for unique physical traits like the size of forehead or the distance from your eye to ear, then creates a geometric map of your face and compares it to a database of thousands of other people. The Stanford researchers say their algorithm gets it right 81% of the time for men and 71% for women. All of this raises questions about how the new face recognition technology will influence privacy and sexual identity in a brave new AI world. And joining us is Professor Nick Rule. Welcome.
Thank you.
So you've been studying gaydar for a long time. There seems to be more support. It's actually a thing.
That's true, yeah. In the last 15 years, my lab has been showing that people can accurately tell whether someone is gay or straight just from looking at a photo of their face.
Wow. And so this new study, can you describe how it works using AI, artificial intelligence?
Essentially what the authors of this work did was to take photos of people from online dating advertisements and feed them into a computer algorithm that it then taught to tell whether someone was gay or straight. Based on that, they found that when they tested the algorithm without showing it any images, that it could still accurately tell it about 81%.
Well, this is something that they used. The computer was asked to say which man is gay and which man is straight. How would that actually work? And what do you think of how it was done?
Right. Aside from some of the obvious differences with the facial hair there, the straight man has a wider face, and this isn't surprising at all. Straight men would generally have higher levels of testosterone, which during adolescence would cause their faces to actually become wider when their bones are growing.
So if there are actual physical differences that can be identified, does that support the idea that we've been hearing about, arguing about forever, that there's a gay gene?
Well, a gay gene, I'm not so sure, but the evidence in favor of there being a biological basis for sexual orientation is incontrovertible at this point.
These are all from a dating site. That's how they got the faces, thousands of faces. Is there something particular about a dating site? Does that worry you in any way? It is just faces from a dating site.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, photos that we post on dating sites aren't necessarily how we represent ourselves every day in the world, right? We take a lot of time to think about how we want to look on a dating website. We want to look attractive, of course, and that can definitely change the photo that someone chooses. That said, at the same time, research out of my lab has shown that it doesn't matter whether we use a Facebook photo, if we use a photo that we took in the laboratory, or if we take a photo from someone's high school yearbook even. The rates of accuracy for telling whether someone is gay or straight are pretty much the same.
There's been a lot of, in history, phrenology, there's been all assumptions made about people's bone structure or whatever. There's dangers here, are there not?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, people can go a little overboard with misinterpreting the information that you get from someone's face. That said, there are kernels of truth at the same time as well.
You're a gay man. You've done all of this research. Are you concerned how bad actors, say, the country of Uganda, which kills gay men, how this could possibly be misused?
Definitely. I mean, I think to some extent, a government like Uganda or, Chechnya could take this information and automate, sort of identifying gay people and rounding them up and incarcerating them. And I think that's a concern that, we should all have. But at the same time, that it's not necessarily a concern of the technology as much as the people who use it.
So was this study good, or is it a good thing that it's out?
I think in a way it is. I think it helps to agitate some of the policy discussions around the protections that we need for social categories like sexual orientation. When you look at a lot of the rhetoric that comes out of some politicians' mouths in other places outside of Canada, you hear this argument that people they don't need to be protected in terms of their sexual orientation because no one knows whether they're gay or straight until they say so. I mean, these data suggest otherwise, and it supports a lot of what my lab has been showing for a long time now.
A lot to watch for there. Thank you so much, Nick.
My pleasure.
Professor Nick Rule.